It began with a whisper of a single comment at a glittering gala that changed everything. An art dealer spoke of a tiara, once belonging to the British crown, now seen in Monaco. Laughter rippled across the room, but behind the smiles, certain faces froze. For those who knew the vaults, that wasn't a joke. It was a warning. Something sacred had slipped away, and the truth would ignite a fire no one could contain. The gala itself was a parade of wealth and power, an evening where diamonds gleamed under chandeliers and the air hummed with polite conversation. But when the words British crown and rare tiara fell into the crowd, they carried a weight far heavier than any jewel could bear. Some brushed it off as another one of those eccentric collectors' tales, but others, the ones who remembered the Queen Mother's vault, who had seen those very jewels locked away behind layers of steel, knew this was no careless anecdote. Their hearts stilled, their eyes sharpened, and suddenly the sparkle of the evening seemed to dim. By the next morning, murmurs had stretched far beyond the gala. In the palace corridors, aides began comparing photographs, digging through old banquet archives, flipping through records of state visits. The tiara in question had not been seen publicly in decades, but its absence had never been questioned because it was assumed safe, untouchable, secure behind the walls of Windsor. Yet the whispers suggested otherwise. Was it possible that an heirloom worn at coronations and etched into the nation's memory was now displayed in some private salon, stripped from the crown's history? The first internal checks revealed unsettling inconsistencies. A sapphire brooch, once documented in exhibitions, was noted as out for restoration. A pearl choker, listed as part of a royal wardrobe, was marked on loan. A diamond snuff box traced back centuries was awaiting return. Each explanation, taken alone, seemed harmless, but together they painted a picture of something more sinister. A pattern of vanishing treasures, each cloaked by excuses that were beginning to fray at the edges. Whispers soon grew into hushed debates. Were these pieces misplaced? Were they mishandled? Or, unthinkably, had someone moved them deliberately? Palace staff exchanged glances, lowering their voices whenever footsteps echoed through the halls. What had started as curiosity now carried the taste of dread. A storm was forming, and the unease spread like smoke curling through corridors where portraits of past monarchs hung, silent witnesses to the growing disarray. The significance of the jewels was not measured in carats or in gold, but in what they represented. They were not mere ornaments, but vessels of memory. They had been worn by queens in moments of triumph, carried through wars, displayed at coronations, and passed down as symbols of continuity. To lose them wasn't just to misplace valuables, it was to sever the thread that bound the monarchy to its past. Each missing piece carried with it the weight of centuries, and every absence widened the wound. At the heart of this rising panic loomed one inescapable truth. Jewels of this magnitude do not simply disappear. They are guarded, sealed, catalogued, and accounted for with obsessive care. For several to vanish, silently, without the public knowing, pointed to something far darker than negligence. Someone with access, someone trusted, had moved them. And if that were true, then the betrayal was not only of the vaults, it was of the crown itself. As the whispers thickened into urgent conversations behind closed doors, one name rose steadily to the surface: William. Not as a future king, not as a son of Charles, but as the one figure in the family who carried both the duty of legacy and the courage to confront hard truths. Staff began to speculate that only he could shoulder this storm, that only he would act decisively where others might turn away. The thought alone brought both comfort and fear. Comfort that someone would face the truth. Fear that the truth might tear the family apart. But what began as whispers would soon grow into thunder, and William was about to discover a betrayal too dangerous to ignore. Royal jewels don't vanish. They are guarded, catalogued, and treated as fragments of history itself. Yet, one by one, the treasures seemed to slip into shadows, explained away as loaned or under restoration. But the excuses piled higher than the evidence, and as the palace clung to silence, William realized this wasn't mere mismanagement, it was theft. The first to disappear was a brooch once favored by the Queen Mother, a sapphire framed with diamonds, its presence immortalized in countless portraits and banquets. The logbook marked it as out for exhibition, yet no exhibition could produce proof of receiving it. Soon after, a pearl choker, long associated with state visits and photographs etched into the nation's memory, was said to be under repair. But repair work required documentation, and none could be found. Then came the whispers about a tiara, not any tiara, but one that had rested on royal brows during coronations. The explanation: loaned to a museum. But which museum? No one knew. Palace staff exchanged nervous glances, their unease swelling with every passing day. None dared speak too loudly. To accuse openly would be to accuse the crown itself, and such words carried the weight of treason. Instead, quiet murmurs circulated in corridors, a growing awareness that something systematic was taking place. Too many pieces are gone, too many explanations that dissolved when pressed. The pattern was undeniable. This was not the random misplacement of history. It was organized, controlled. Each disappearance was wrapped in a plausible story, each story designed to dull suspicion, to buy time. Yet behind the excuses lay intent. Someone with power and authority was orchestrating a quiet exodus of royal treasures, using the palace's trust as both shield and weapon. The realization chilled those who began to piece it together. These jewels were not simply ornaments, they were symbols of triumph and loss, carried through wars and peace treaties, worn during moments that defined the monarchy's place in the world. To watch them vanish was to watch the monarchy itself unravel, one gemstone at a time. William could not ignore it. While others hesitated, he moved with deliberate calm. He began his inquiries in silence, asking questions masked as curiosity, tracing records, checking against photographs of past banquets, coronations, and family gatherings. The further he dug, the darker the truth appeared. Every missing jewel carried with it the echo of a queen's memory, a fragment of legacy now dangling in the shadows of an unknown hand. And the evidence pointed towards something terrifying. This was not an outsider breaching the walls of the crown. This was someone from within. The weight pressed on William's chest. As heir to the throne, he knew what was at stake. To expose theft at this scale meant risking scandal of unimaginable magnitude. But to ignore it meant allowing history itself to bleed into private hands, sold off piece by piece until the monarchy became hollow. Duty left him no choice. He would act, even if it meant tearing apart the very fabric of family trust. And so, William turned to a man the palace had used before, one who knew how to expose secrets without leaving footprints. His name was never spoken aloud in public, but in royal circles, it carried weight. Simon Harcourt, a ghost from intelligence, a hunter of shadows, called in under William's direct command, his task was simple yet terrifying: trace the jewels without alerting the world. What he uncovered would shake the monarchy to its foundations. Harcourt was not a man of noise or spectacle. He thrived in silence, moving through the undercurrent of high society, like smoke slipping through cracks. He understood that in matters such as this, the palace could not afford headlines. What William needed was not a public inquiry but proof so irrefutable it would silence denial before it even formed. Harcourt began where most would not dare: auction houses, private catalogs, and discreet sales rooms where the elite traded history as though it were currency. He sifted through listings, dissected phrases like European royal origin and 19th century provenance, searching for items whose descriptions carried a familiar echo of the crown. It didn't take long before patterns emerged. A diamond necklace with a peculiar arrangement identical to one seen draped on Queen Mary in official portraits. A sapphire ring, anonymous seller, its cut unmistakably matched to the archives. A brooch, described vaguely as Victorian, bearing uncanny resemblance to Queen Victoria's personal favorite. These were not coincidences. They were fingerprints left behind by history itself. Each discovery was a breadcrumb, leading deeper into a carefully concealed network, a system built to move priceless treasures without stirring suspicion. Harcourt's instincts told him this was no clumsy theft. The movements were too precise, too calculated. Same couriers, same shell companies, the same handful of brokers weaving in and out of Paris, Monaco, and Geneva. These were the playgrounds of wealth and secrecy, where fortunes changed hands without records, and where questions were never asked, as long as payments cleared. Whoever orchestrated this operation understood the art of invisibility. They knew how to make jewels disappear from a palace vault and reappear under glass in a billionaire's private gallery. The deeper Harcourt dug, the more one name began to surface: Charles Everley. To the world, he was a polished consultant in the luxury collectibles market. But to those who remembered palace history, he was a ghost from the past. Once entrusted with access to the royal vaults, he had left under vague, unspoken circumstances. Now, it seemed, he had resurfaced as the discreet matchmaker between heritage treasures and buyers with no conscience. His fingerprints were everywhere, hidden beneath layers of paperwork and transactions, yet clear to an eye trained in deception. But Harcourt knew Everley was not the mastermind. He was a broker, a middleman, someone skilled at moving pieces on behalf of another, and that led to a more chilling discovery. Evidence hinted at a figure shielded under diplomatic clearance, someone whose very presence at private meetings was cloaked by immunity. A woman, British, elegant, arriving with quiet authority, dealing not like a thief but like someone born into privilege, accustomed to power. Every trace pointed to a protected insider who could glide between worlds without suspicion. Harcourt began stitching the threads together, each revelation pulling the picture into sharper focus. The auctions, the couriers, the sales, the discreet meetings, all roads converged at one truth too devastating to say aloud. But when the investigator pulled the final thread, the mask fell away, and the name behind the betrayal was one William never imagined. The report was thick, heavy with proof. Photos, signatures, travel logs, each page cutting deeper into William's chest. The woman arranging sales, cloaked in diplomatic protection, was none other than Queen Camilla. A stepmother, a queen, a betrayer. William's hand shook as he realized the jewels were not lost, they were sold, and the seller was family. Harcourt's dossier left no room for doubt. Auction house receipts matched to flight records. Couriers traced to private vaults in Geneva. Security clearances granting access to jewels that should have been untouchable. Photographs captured in hushed rooms, blurred yet undeniable, showing the profile of the one woman who should have stood as guardian of the crown, not its saboteur. The evidence was so meticulously layered, so airtight, that even William's heart, desperate to deny the truth, could find no escape. Camilla was not merely complicit, she was at the very center. The weight of betrayal nearly crushed him. Loyalty demanded silence after all. She was his stepmother, the woman his father had elevated beside him. But duty screamed louder. He knew the monarchy was not his personal inheritance. It was the people's trust, a legacy carved in sacrifice, blood, and centuries of devotion. If Camilla could betray that trust by bleeding the jewels into private hands, then William understood what had to be done. He was not simply confronting theft, he was confronting a fracture in the very soul of the crown. The jewels themselves took on a haunting symbolism in his mind. They were not just stones and gold, they were fragments of memory, the lifeblood of the monarchy. Each gem carried echoes of queens who had endured wars, navigated crises, and bound the nation together. To see them sold like trinkets to nameless collectors was more than theft, it was desecration. And the desecrator was not an outsider clawing at the gates, but a woman inside the palace walls, sworn to protect what she had instead dismantled. The realization tore at William's heart. He wrestled with questions no heir should face. Should he protect family, shielding the scandal from the world, or protect the crown, exposing Camilla's betrayal, even if it meant shattering his father's trust? It was a conflict between blood and duty, a torment that left him pacing in the dark hours of night, torn between the boy who had once sought a mother and the man destined to be king. But the truth was merciless. Betrayal from within cuts deeper than any attack from the outside. For William, it was no longer a matter of choice. It was inevitable. The crown demanded action. Silence would mean complicity. He could not allow the monarchy to wither under secrets and shadows, not when the proof sat heavy in his hands. And so, behind the palace walls, William summoned Camilla for a meeting that would alter history. The room was silent, the air sharp with unspoken rage. William sat steady, dossier on the table. When Camilla entered, her poise never faltered. But as William slid the evidence toward her, she didn't flinch, didn't glance down. She simply stared at him, as though she already knew her crime had finally been unmasked. William had chosen the setting with precision. No witnesses, no advisors, no safety in numbers, just the heir to the throne and the woman who had dared to betray it. His calm was deliberate, masking the storm raging inside. Every fiber of his being wanted to shout, to demand why, but he knew restraint was power. The thicker the silence, the heavier his authority became. In that stillness, Camilla's role as queen consort withered, and William's position as future sovereign loomed larger. Her composure was unsettling. No protest, no excuses, no frantic scrambling to explain away the evidence. Instead, she sat in dignified stillness, eyes fixed on William, as if her silence alone was her defense. It was the kind of poise born of years in public life, the kind that concealed weakness behind polished grace. Yet in that moment, it carried no strength. It was not defiance, it was resignation. She knew the truth was out. For William, the confrontation was more than an interrogation. It was a clash between family and crown, between the stepson who had once been forced to accept Camilla into his life and the future king who could no longer tolerate betrayal. The conflict carved into his heart like a blade. He had promised his people protection, sworn to guard the monarchy's honor. Yet here sat the woman his father loved, the woman who had stood by Charles at his side, revealed now as the thief of the monarchy's very soul. He asked no questions. The dossier itself was the question, and her silence the answer. The longer the moment stretched, the clearer it became that this was not a family dispute. It was an assertion of power. William was no longer the boy who endured the past. He was the man who would shape the crown's future. And in that room, the balance shifted. Authority no longer rested with Camilla's title. It rested with William's judgment. It was not anger that guided him, but cold clarity. He understood that her betrayal was not simply about jewels. It was about what those jewels represented: continuity, history, and trust. And by selling them, she had sold her right to stand as queen. The weight of that realization hardened his voice, his words carrying the quiet fury of inevitability. He would not shield her. He would not bury the truth. He would act, and he would act decisively. But what was said in whispers within that room would thunder in public, for William was ready to show the world no royal stood above accountability. When William stepped before the cameras, the world expected diplomacy. Instead, they witnessed history. His words were brief but brutal. The monarchy must protect its legacy, no matter the cost. And with that, Camilla's title was stripped from her like the jewels she had sold. The speech was crafted with surgical precision. Not a word wasted, not a phrase left vulnerable to misinterpretation. William spoke not as a son or a stepson, but as the embodiment of the crown's duty. He spoke of heritage, of the sacred bond between the monarchy and the people, of the trust passed down through generations. His tone carried neither rage nor mercy. It was the voice of history itself, cutting through centuries of silence to declare that betrayal would not be tolerated, not even from within. He did not mention her name, yet everyone knew. The deliberate omissions only sharpened the blade of his message. The queen consort's duties were concluded. Her patronages would be redistributed. Her public role had ended. The title once bestowed upon her was revoked in an instant, dissolved before the eyes of a stunned world. For the first time in living memory, a royal consort had been dethroned, not by death, but by disgrace. The impact was immediate and seismic. News outlets erupted within minutes, their headlines screaming of a royal reckoning. Some called it ruthless, others hailed it as righteous. Social media fractured between outrage and applause, voices clashing across continents. Analysts replayed every second of William's words, dissecting not only what he had said, but what he had left unsaid. The silence surrounding Camilla's absence was louder than any accusation. Inside the palace, the atmosphere grew heavier. Officials avoided eye contact, aides whispered in corners, and the press office declined every request for further comment. That silence became fuel for speculation. Was Camilla forced out? Did she admit guilt? Where was she now? No answers came, only shadows, as if the palace itself had swallowed her name into its walls. The monarchy had drawn a line, and that line left no room for explanation. Symbolism weighed on every syllable of William's decree. A royal title, once thought to be eternal, had proven fragile, fragile as trust, fragile as loyalty. The jewels Camilla had sold were not merely treasures, they had been emblems of continuity. By severing her from the crown, William had sent a message both brutal and clear. Titles exist only so long as they are honored. Strip away the integrity, and the title dissolves into nothing. The world, gasping at the audacity of the decision, had barely begun to absorb the shock. But even as analysts debated and headlines multiplied, Camilla herself was already gone, slipping into obscurity before the storm could consume her fully. But as the world gasped, Camilla herself was already vanishing into the shadows, her fate sealed in silence. There were no trumpets, no farewell parades. Camilla left the palace in a single black car, unseen, uncelebrated, unacknowledged. Within hours, her portraits were removed, her name erased from royal programs. The monarchy adjusted as though she had never existed, an exile not of geography, but of history itself. The departure was deliberately silent, designed to extinguish noise before it could ignite. No public statement marked her exit, no sympathetic words softened the blow. She simply slipped away, swallowed by the same shadows in which her betrayal had thrived. Once the consort of a king, she was now nothing more than a memory the palace refused to keep alive. It was a punishment harsher than exile to a far-off land. It was erased from the very institution she once stood beside. Inside the royal halls, the cleansing began swiftly. Portraits featuring her likeness were taken down from galleries where generations of royals had gazed out in oil and frame. Invitations and ceremonial programs were revised overnight. Her name struck out as though it had never belonged there at all. Even her mention in official records grew scarce, replaced with sterile phrases that left no trace of her presence. The palace, in its quiet efficiency, was rewriting its own story as an act of survival through omission. For the public, the sudden disappearance was jarring. Some saw her downfall as justice, a bold stand against deceit, applauding William for placing the integrity of the monarchy above personal ties. They hailed him as the reformer, the one who dared to prove no crown was safe on a head tainted by betrayal. Others, however, mourned the abruptness. They argued that William's judgment had been merciless, that family bonds should not be shattered in such brutal fashion. Voices rose in defense of compassion, questioning whether the monarchy had traded too much humanity in its bid to preserve history. The contrast was striking yesterday. Camilla carried the weight of titles, patronages, and influence. Today, she bore only silence. Power to nothingness in the span of procrest. Hours. The fall was absolute, and in that descent lay the haunting truth of monarchy itself. Everything rests upon trust, and once that trust is broken, even the grandest titles collapse like sand through clenched fists. For William, the decision carried its own burden. Stripping her title and forcing her into oblivion had safeguarded the crown, but at what cost? He felt the sting of consequence, the weight of a choice that might haunt him for years. Did he act with justice, or had he crossed the line into cruelty? The question lingered in his private moments, gnawing at him like a shadow that no speech or applause could drive away. And yet, there was no turning back. The exile of Camilla was not only a punishment, but a signal to the future. It was a declaration that under William's watch, the monarchy would not bend for comfort or blood ties. It would be rebuilt upon stricter discipline, harsher scrutiny, and an unyielding defense of its legacy. The cost had been high, but the message was clear. Betrayal would never again be allowed to hide beneath a crown. Yet for William, this was never just about Camilla. It was about something far greater: the jewels themselves and the meaning they carried. The jewels were more than ornaments. They were the soul of the monarchy. With Camilla gone, William ordered an overhaul. New security, new audits, new rules. For the first time, not even the highest royals could move a single piece without scrutiny. The monarchy was rebuilding itself, scarred but unbroken. The vaults became the heart of this renewal. Every item, from tiaras to brooches, from crowns to chalices, was recatalogued with precision. What had once been guarded by tradition alone was now protected by layers of accountability. Logs were rewritten, access restricted, and the shadows where betrayal had thrived were stripped away. It was not just a matter of locking away treasures, it was a symbolic cleansing, a way of reclaiming what had been tainted by deceit. The Palandide P's 1740 palace sought not only to protect the jewels, but to repair the very trust that had been shattered. For William, the task was deeply personal. He knew the damage inflicted by Camilla's actions could not be erased in a single decree. The public had watched a queen consort fall in disgrace, and such wounds do not heal easily. Yet by imposing rules that applied even to himself, William sent a powerful message. No one was beyond accountability, no title above duty. In doing so, he drew a line that would define his reign long before the crown officially rested upon his head. The public reaction was telling. For some, William emerged as a reformer, a man willing to cut through sentiment in order to preserve integrity. His image, once tied to tradition, was now reshaped into that of a guardian willing to confront corruption head-on. For others, skepticism remained. Could the monarchy, so often accused of shielding its own, truly change? The sight of William tightening the very walls around the jewels was his answer, a visible act of restoration, designed not for comfort, but for reassurance. Symbolism clung to every step of this process. The jewels, once slipping into the shadows, now gleamed again as anchors of continuity. They represented not just wealth or beauty, but the unbroken thread between past and present. To restore them was to restore the monarchy's identity, to remind the nation that while betrayal had tested its strength, it had not destroyed it. Every new layer of protection became a vow to future generations that the mistakes of the present would never be repeated. Yet even as the monarchy rebuilt, the scandal left an indelible mark. Camilla's fall would not be forgotten, nor could the memory of how close the crown came to losing more than jewels. It was a scar that would follow William into his reign, a reminder that betrayal could come from those closest, and that vigilance was the only true safeguard. And in that scar lay the lesson that would shape the monarchy's path for decades. Power was fragile, trust more precious than diamonds. But beneath the triumph, one truth lingered. This was not about jewels. It was about the price of betrayal, and the line William had drawn for all royals to see. Camilla's downfall was more than scandal. It was a message etched into royal history, that even the crown's closest could fall. That betrayal cut deepest when it came from within, and that William was ready to sacrifice blood ties to protect the throne. The jewels may have been sold, but the monarchy had reclaimed something far more valuable: its spine. For William, the emotional toll was heavy. He had not acted out of spite or vengeance, but out of necessity. Still, necessity leaves scars. In private, he bore the weight of knowing he had dismantled his stepmother's place in the monarchy, that he had forced his father's wife into exile. Strength has defined his decision, but strength always demands a cost. That cost lingered in sleepless nights, in the echoes of questions he dared not voice. Had he saved the monarchy, or had he damned it to forever carry the mark of division? The long-term impact was undeniable. The monarchy, often accused of hiding its sins behind polished walls, had shown that even its most protected could be held to account. For some, this restored faith. They saw William's actions as proof that the crown would not place titles above truth. For others, it was a chilling reminder of how ruthless the institution could be, even toward its own. Integrity had been reclaimed, but it came wrapped in a reminder that the monarchy's survival was built not on sentiment, but on sacrifice. The public itself remained divided. Some praised William as the future king who had the courage to wield the sword of reform, applauding his decision as both bold and necessary. Others whispered unease, questioning whether the move was too severe, whether compassion had been buried beneath duty. Yet, even those who disagreed could not deny one thing. William had shown a firmness few expected, a resolve that set him apart as a leader who would not flinch in the face of betrayal. Camilla's name, once spoken with ceremony, began to fade into shadow. She was a cautionary tale, whispered rather than celebrated, her presence erased from records but etched into memory as a warning. To betray the crown was to erase oneself from it, to be condemned not just in life but in history. Her exile became a ghostly reminder, a shadow cast long over the monarchy, ensuring that no one, no matter their rank, would forget the price of disloyalty. The symbolism of betrayal reshaped the monarchy's path. It was no longer enough to simply wear the crown. One had to honor it. Every future royal, every descendant of the line, would live under the shadow of Camilla's fall, reminded that their power existed only so long as it was bound to integrity. The jewels had been restored, the titles recalibrated, but the true inheritance was the lesson itself. Betrayal corrodes from within, and vigilance is the monarchy's only shield. William's reign, though not yet fully begun, was already marked by this decisive act. It was a moment that defined him not as a man bound by family ties, but as a sovereign bound by duty. His legacy, from this day forward, would be forever tied to the day he chose the crown over blood, truth over silence. And so, history would remember not the jewels sold, but the crown defended by a prince who chose duty over silence, and in doing so, changed the monarchy forever. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.